My approach to being a moderator in the opening session is to tell stories. People remember stories, but they don't remember bullet points on a PowerPoint. And the stories tell it all. And in the maritime history of our planet, there are terrific stories that are all totally relevant today. Because as you'll figure out as we go through this, it's important to have the right equipment, know your equipment, but it's more important to have the leadership and seamanship skills that mariners have had to deploy for centuries. And these stories illustrate those. This was an interesting comment by some anonymous sailor. Ship in the harbor is safe, but that's not what ships are built for. You guys are going out on the water. There's a bit of inherent risk in it. And the more offshore you go, the higher the risk. Although we saw at Dauphin Island that you don't have to be offshore to be at risk. There is a natural risk in the sport we love, but how to cope with it is what we're talking about. This was a famous Roman comment when Rome was starving and they had to send ships to North Africa for grain. This is not our theme. You can do both, sail and live. To Storm Trysail Club, it's about leadership and seamanship. All roads lead back to these two qualities. And we're going to get pretty deeply into this. The father of the U.S. nuclear Navy, Admiral Rickover, did the best job, we think, of tying leadership in with accepting responsibility. I'm going to read this. Responsibility is a unique concept. It can only reside and adhere in a single individual. You may share it with others, but your portion is not diminished. You may delegate it, but it's still with you. You may disclaim it, but you cannot divest yourself of it. Unless you can point the finger at the man who's responsible when something goes wrong, then you never had anyone responsible. Responsibility can be shared, accountability cannot. Being accountable not only means being responsible for something, but also ultimately being answerable for actions. So in our concept of sailing, leadership is both accepting responsibility and accountability for it. If you're a skipper, a boat owner, a person in charge of a boat, your primary role in taking that role of leadership is to be responsible for what happens. And basically everything we're going to talk about comes from what do you do if you're the responsible person? How can you make sure you're doing the right things with your boat, the crew, and that day of the week? What is seamanship? Straight out of the dictionary, the knowledge of and skill in navigation, operation, and maintenance of a ship. It's not coincidental that all the great navies and merchant marines of the world use sail training to train their officers and their whether they be naval officers or merchant marine officers. Because if you can learn how to sail and operate as a team and be exposed to the powers of wind and current, you'll be a better mariner on board ships. The role of the captain is unique. Now, in the old days, it was even more unique than it is now. If you go back to the old days, master and commander was the role of the captain. And this was a role with absolute power, total responsibility. And the reason is that before Marconi came along in the 1890s, ships either they left their port of departure and they either arrived or disappeared. It was really just two choices because there was no communication from ship to shore or ship to ship. And so the role of the captain was extremely important. And these are some of the great captains. We're going to talk about them. And think about it in your own context of the boat. Yes, we have satellite phones. We have iPhones if you're within range, single sideband radios if you have those skills. But you have to go out to sea assuming that you're on your own. You make all the plans and preparations to communicate, your plan of your voyage before and keep in touch while you're at sea. But you have to be prepared to take care of yourself. And if you're not, you really shouldn't be out there. Call for help when you need it, but be prepared to at least take care of yourselves. Arthur Rostron, probably nobody in this call has heard of Arthur Rostron unless you've heard me talk before. But interesting captain. He was not the captain of the Titanic. He was the captain of the Carpathia, the ship that rescued the 700 survivors of the Titanic. Titanic's an old story, but we're touching on it because it is actually what caused the beginning of safety at sea. When the Titanic sunk, it was a traumatic event in the world. It's still the most known maritime event in world history. And following Titanic, 118 countries met and created SOLAS, the Safety of Life at Sea Convention, the first biggest international agreement in human history. And SOLAS, is you still see that. SOLAS is what's on your flares. And it's still SOLAS that the world follows, but it's been modified over the years. It all started with the Titanic. Captain Rostron, skipper of Carpathia, tremendous situation awareness and leadership, or you wouldn't have had 700 survivors. And in those days, if you did something like this, you got a trophy. He wasn't sailing, but Unsinkable Molly Brown gave him a trophy. When the Titanic hit the iceberg, the wireless operators sent out the famous SOSs. It wasn't the first SOS, but it's certainly the most famous. The Carpathia had one radio operator. The Titanic had two because she was the first raider, Carpathia second raider. The radio officer of the Carpathia was going off watch. He's in his pajamas. And for the hell of it, just before he went down to lay down and go to sleep, he put his headphones on and he heard the distress signal. If he hadn't heard that distress signal, there would have been no survivors of the Titanic. He immediately called the captain. He called Captain Rostron up to the bridge, and Rostron immediately ordered the ship to head at full speed to the location of the Titanic. He called his officers together. He had the situational awareness to know what's going to be happening. He knew the water was at freezing temperature because there are icebergs in the vicinity. He knew that the Titanic had hit one. He knew people needed to be rescued as quickly as possible and dealt with hypothermia. And so he called his officers to the bridge. He shut down all the steam going to all the rooms on board, except for the power to the steam to the galley and the engines. And the ship picked up 2 more knots. And he had the officers rig lights on both sides of the ship, swing out all the cranes, the davits, nets over the side, floodlights, heated blankets in the galley, had hot soup ready, and told all the passengers to stay in their cabins and stay out of the way. And when the Carpathia got there, he rescued 700 people. And this is a combination of leadership, situational awareness, and it's a great example. For the hell of it, I found the picture of the Carpathia arriving in New York, just kind of a cool old shot, and just shows what you can find on YouTube. It was a mad scene in New York when she arrived. 100 years later, almost to the day, this is the Costa Concordia, owned by Carnival Cruise Lines, with Captain Scatino on board. And to show off, he passed a little too close to shore. He wanted his friends on shore to know it. He wasn't paying attention to navigation and ripped part of the bottom out of the ship. The only good thing he did that night was he ran her aground on purpose because she was in the process of turning over. He then abandoned ship and left everybody behind. This is the Italian Coast Guard trying to convince Captain Scatino to get back on board. And Scatino did pay for it. He's now in prison. So the comparison of these two captains, voyage planning. I mean, the navigation that Rostron used and the lack of navigation that Scatino displayed. And that's despite having GPS and all the electronics in his favor. Situational awareness. Was he in danger? He didn't even know he was in danger on the Costa Concordia. Obviously, the responsibility, decision of making a character. And it all came down to leadership and seamanship. A couple of quick examples. A car carrier in Southampton, England, right near the Isle of Wight, our favorite sailing area, the Solent. He left the dock with a full load of cars. They weren't stowed properly. The ship wasn't stable. He realized that he was about to go over, but he knew the Bramble Bank is right in the center of the Solent. And to prevent the capsize, he ran aground there, saved the ship and crew. The Korean ferry back in about 5-6 years ago, illegally had added a deck on it. It was a little top heavy, and with 800 people on board, she capsized doing a turn. The captain ordered everybody to stay in their cabins, and he abandoned ship with a crew. And 500 high school students died in their rooms when the ship turned over. He's in prison. The US Navy had issues with collisions a few years ago, and the Navy's conclusion was the watch team should have had the necessary situational awareness. It all comes down to fundamental seamanship. In 2016, the El Faro, one of the bigger ships in the US Merchant Marine, with 33 crew aboard, was on its regular route from Jacksonville to Puerto Rico. Hurricane Joaquin was sitting about 200 miles due east of the Bahamas, not moving, kind of jiggling, as the NOAA folks called it. And the captain of the El Faro was a little overconfident and decided he could go between the hurricane and the Bahamas. And when he got in that position, the storm began moving towards him, pinning him against the banks. Eventually, the ship was rolling so much she lost power and capsized, and everyone went down with the ship. The problem when the Transportation Safety Board went into it, one of those was the captain wasn't taking input from his junior officers. They were worried. They'd expressed some concern. He basically froze them out of the decision making. On weather reports, he wasn't paying close attention, and he was using weather reports that were 9 hours old. And it was the overconfidence and lack of team communications, or what we now call bridge team management, where you make use of the entire team. Think of that on a sailboat, where you have your watch captain's navigator combining with the skipper, helping with decisions and receiving input from the crew, being open to input. That's the El Faro at the bottom. The Bounty is a really interesting example. People think of Captain Bligh, they think of him being such a tough skipper and mutineer, which is not causing a mutiny, but it's not true, because he was the navigator for James Cook on James Cook's famous voyages. He was an incredible navigator. He was a Trafalgar, one of Nelson's best officers. But the crew had spent too much time ashore in Tahiti before they headed for home, and a lot of them were unhappy to leave. And whatever happened, he and 17 men were put in a boat, and they sailed 3,500 miles to Batavia, which is now Jakarta. He lost only one man to cannibals when they went ashore to try to replenish water. And his leadership on that voyage is displayed in the book, The Open Boat Journey, part of the trilogy written in the 1930s. A terrific book. Now, going back to 2012, when Hurricane Sandy, the biggest hurricane we've ever had, was heading for New Jersey, New York, Bounty 2, the replica, is sitting in New London, Connecticut. And the owner was under pressure to get her to Florida for an event, and the skipper was happy to go out to sea, and they figured they could sail around the back of Hurricane Sandy, and they sunk. And the Coast Guard nearly lost the rescuers, and the captain and the cook lost their lives in this sinking. Totally unnecessary, going out of a safe port to sail around a hurricane on a vessel that was not a really great seaboat. The best story of leadership to think of for purposes of what we do, going out sailing and maybe encountering a crisis, is Ernest Shackleton. Most of you have probably read his books on the Endurance or South. He wrote several books, but this was the expedition in 1914. And it's kind of interesting how the advertisement he put in the papers. Of course, in those days, it was men, not men and women. Men wanted for hazardous journeys, small wages, bitter cold, long months of complete darkness, constant dangers, safe return, doubtful, honor and recognition in case of success. And one of Shackleton's great traits was honesty with his people and recognizing what was the challenge, but then dealing with it. Beautiful photographs of Endurance caught in the ice and then getting crushed and sunk. In the lower right, after crossing the ice with the boats and his men when the ship was lost, they got to Elephant Island on the edge of Antarctica, and they took one of the longboats, and 6 of them sailed 1,000 miles across the Drake Passage to South Georgia, then climbed 2 Mile Mountains to get to a Norwegian whaling village. The leadership that Shackleton displayed was classic. But the surprising thing was a professor, Cohn, at Harvard Business School, she did a study on Shackleton and made him the subject of a leadership course. She read the diaries of the men with Shackleton, and she expected to find pessimism, depression, people feeling sorry for themselves. They're stuck in Antarctica with no chance to live. But she found the opposite. They were optimistic. And here are some quotes. You can read them here. He could visualize things ahead. As far as he safeguarded any eventuality. He made contingency plans in great detail. He was flexible, wasn't afraid to change his mind as the situation warranted. No matter what turns up, he's always ready to alter his plans to make fresh ones, and in the meantime, laugh, joke, and keep everyone's spirits up. He inspires optimism in everyone. These are leadership qualities. And if you're on your boat and you're offshore and things change, you got to be flexible. You got to change plans, but you've got to maintain the optimism on board. And that optimism doesn't come from BS. It comes from having been prepared and trained. What she said in the Harvard Business School: acknowledge turbulence, embrace its opportunities, and meet its challenges with confidence and effect. And Napoleon, leader is a dealer in hope. So if this may seem grandiose, but you're going on your little voyage in your little boat with your little crew, but you need to have thought of the qualities that will enable you to do it successfully. And if you hit obstacles, how are you going to deal with them? And Shackleton's methods became known as Shackletons Way. And you look at this list, and it's exactly what a skipper of an ocean racing boat or offshore cruiser needs to do. And a lot of this is useful even just for local sailing. Preparation and planning and selection of the team, sharing the goal, the trust, respect, and honesty, empathy, understand your people, communication up and down the chain of command, situational awareness, adjust plans to change circumstances, accept responsibility for mistakes and move on, crisis response, calm confidence, step by step, instill optimism, and never give up. So this could apply to anything, running a business, but it has particular impact when you're going to do activities like going on the ocean or climbing mountains. Great seamanship examples. I'll just flick through them. Conrad Coleman lost his rig, did a jury rig, damage control, and spent a week without food in order to finish the Vendée Globe race. And the French welcomed him in as a hero. Can't help and go through this kind of presentation without looking at yachting disasters. But fortunately, we've learned a lot from these disasters. And if you don't look at them, you're missing the opportunity to learn. Sailboat safety at sea didn't begin with the Titanic. Formal safety at sea for sailboats really began with the Fastnet race in 1979. The safety at sea regime for offshore racing was kind of anemic before then, but 15 fatalities plus 3 on boats that were accompanying the race, 18 total. Grimalkin rolled over by waves, top left-hand corner. Crew panics. They noticed 2 of their shipmates dead due to the roll. The other 4 jump in the life raft and go off. They were lucky to be picked up. Grimalkin never sunk. The 2 teammates weren't dead. One of them was. You can see him in the forward end of the cockpit with his yellow foul weather gear. The other one was injured. They left their crewmates behind in their panic, and there was no reason to abandon ship. The boat had very little water in it, just had no rig. So obviously not trained, not prepared. No, the leadership was poor, and they panicked. Great shot of the Royal Navy, the biggest marine rescue since Dunkirk for the British. Sydney Hobart, 1998, lost 6 people. In conditions, it's amazing they didn't lose, far more. The Australians really were well prepared. They're terrific sailors, but they hit a storm with 80 knot winds, literally 80-foot breaking waves, taking helicopter photos of them. Incredible. But it was the weather forecasting, which was a problem. The community response to these 2 events was enhanced safety at sea training. Not just classroom, but the beginning of hands-on. It started after the Sydney Hobart. We've carried it much further with Storm Trysail Club hands-on. We're the only ones who actually put people on boats and send them out to practice. Everything else is done on shore hands-on. Very good, but we like to actually put people on boats. Online and video, Storm Trysail, CCA, US Sailing have all been a part of this. Vessel design. After the Fastnet race, the boats getting rolled, they looked at static stability. But after the big waves in the Sydney Hobart, they realized they need to look at dynamic stability, waves hitting boats, not just, had to look at 2 types of stability. Required equipment, all these began to get added to what's required, and technology made some of these available. Communications, position reporting. Now a lot of that's done automatically, and weather and sea state information. In both races, conditions deteriorated. Lows became what meteorologists call bombs, and deepened fast and more than expected. But how do you communicate it out to the fleet that this is happening? And then the organization and response by organizers of races to problems. All this was vastly improved after these two events. And yeah, 2012, America went through its bad events. The Farallones race, where the Sydney 38 low-speed chase cut the corner of the Farallon Islands. You can see the red course. She cut through shallows, and there were swells coming from offshore. And if the water's only 20, 25 feet deep, you're going to get breaking waves. She got caught in a breaking wave. The crew had various types of safety equipment. Somebody had a harness, but they weren't tethered to the boat. Another one had a fanny pack. They had miscellaneous equipment, so they weren't without equipment, but they weren't properly fully equipped. And the skipper had kind of handed over the boat to a local very good sailor who was on the helm, and nobody was navigating. So leadership issues. The 5 people who died were the ones that got swept out of the boat and killed on the rocks by the seas. The 3 people managed to stay aboard were fine. Even though the boat wasn't fine, you're still best off in the boat unless the boat is actually going under or about to explode from a fire. The faces mean something. When you see the faces of the people who didn't make it, it hits home. 2 weeks later, in the Ensenada race, the Thunder 37 quit the race and started motoring to Ensenada because there wasn't much wind. And they used, you have 2 types of charts, vector and raster. A raster chart is a photograph of a chart. So when a raster chart comes up on your chart plotter, if there's a group of islands, they're on the chart no matter what scale the chart is. They could be small little drawings, or they could be big on the chart depending on the scale. But a vector chart, which uses less computer space, you need to zoom in, because when you're on the wide scale, certain features don't show, like little island groups. And unfortunately, these guys set their course for Ensenada. They did not zoom in and run the cursor down their route to see what might be in their way, and they missed the Channel Islands on their chart, but they didn't miss it. At night, they hit the Channel Islands, and all 4 died. That's the biggest piece of the boat they could find. And then Uncontrollable Urge, a Columbia 30, in heavy weather off San Clemente, lost its rudder and turned down local help because they thought they could sail their way out, but they're only a mile off of a lee shore, and they shouldn't have turned down help. And it turned out they couldn't sail the boat without a rudder. And when they went up on the beach, 1 crew died. So situational awareness. There's times where help is available. You got to take it. You can't say, sorry, I think I can handle this. You got to take it. We'll see more of this later with some of our interviews with survivors. In all these incidents, there was a lack of situational awareness, a lack of understanding that they were sailing into danger, poor navigation or complacency, improper lack of use of the safety equipment aboard. It's not just enough to have it aboard. You got to know when and how to use it. Leadership and seamanship, same 2 words. There's good news. In the fast race in 2011, rough race, and 1 interesting serious incident with no loss of life. And one of the reasons was the kind of training that Dan gives to crew. I was on Carina 48 feet, and Rambler 100, the biggest boat in the race. George Davis, a retired chairman of United Technologies. We were the US team. Rambler rounded first. We were way back, but first in our class. And we thought we were at the halfway point, going to win the team trophy. But a few yards later, her keel broke off. No one knew it because there's bad visibility. A lot of boats sailed a mile by her, about a mile away, but couldn't see her. But how did these guys get up on the boat? This boat capsized in about 10 seconds. And you talk about situational awareness. One of the crew, when they heard the braking, they heard the brake and the boat tipped right away. And pretty much the experienced people on board, they're all experienced, knew what happened. They knew the keel had fallen off. They knew they're going over. one of the jib trimmers grabbed the end of a jib sheet, and as the boat rolled, he walked, crawled around and jumped in the water holding the jib sheet. Why? He knew that to survive the 55-degree temperature water, they'd have to get up on the boat, get out of the water. And to get up on a really smooth big boat with these high sides, you needed a rope. He pulled the jib sheet out, threw it over the boat to somebody on the other side, and the crew was able to scramble up on the rope. That is all but 5 people. 4 people were separated from the boat, including George Eddy. This picture takes place 2 hours later. These 5 people were in the water for over 2 hours because the mast was stuck in the mud, but the current dragged 4 people away. And then Jerry Kirby from Newport decided, well, they shouldn't be alone. They may need help. So he swam over and joined them. And the 5 people circled up, as Dan will teach you, and kept each other warm as they could and their spirits up. And they barely survived. Now, interesting, this person in the wool cap at the top of the picture in the water, you can see their face is barely above the surface, and the PFD is kind of way off their body. None of these guys had crotch straps. Back in 2011, most people didn't wear crotch straps. If you have a PFD, you need crotch straps. It'll help keep your mouth way further above the water when you're in the PFD. Very important. These guys survived. Now, the boat capsized, and its EPIRB, its satellite beacon to the Coast Guard, was inside the boat. Luckily, George had a pocket EPIRB, and when he lit it off, the signal went to Washington to the Coast Guard, and he did the correct thing, which he registered the EPIRB online. So everybody goes offshore should at least have a pocket EPIRB and have it registered. The Coast Guard called his office in Connecticut saying, we have an EPIRB registered to George, and where is he? Is this a false alarm? They said, no, he's on his sailboat in the Irish Sea. So the US Coast Guard called the British Coast Guard, who called the Royal Ocean Racing Club, who said, no, Rambler is okay as far as we know. And they looked on their computer screen and realized that her signal from her yellow brick tracker was no longer visible. They called the Irish Coast Guard, who sent out the Irish Coast Guard from the port of Baltimore, which is the nearest one to fasten it, 10 miles away. And the news boat thought there was something going on. They followed it with all the newspaper reporters. And it was the Coast Guard that rescued the crew from the upside down Rambler. And it was the news boat that rescued the others. So it's a very interesting story of both training and preparation, technology, and luck. A little bit of courage by the guys in the water and those who helped. No loss life why? Training. These guys all had survival training, situation awareness. They had the equipment. When you're on a boat like Rambler with the water slinging down the deck at 20, 30 knots, you wear a dry suit. So that's a kind of survival suit. The POB technology, the response and determination, leadership, luck. Everybody survived, 23 people on this boat. So what's the answer? Available technology, use it, know how to use it, know what it does. And then you got to combine with leadership and seamanship. The hardware alone is not enough. The leadership and seamanship, which is not modern or old, it's time immemorial, is what is really important. And that includes your responsibility, accountability, your training, your knowledge, your equipment, awareness, teamwork, optimism, determination. So I'm going to end with 2 things. One is Captain Ed Schumann, who spent 5 years with John McCain as a prisoner in Hanoi during the Vietnam War. He was a Navy pilot, came out of it, spent most of it in solitary, and ended up running US Navy Academy sailing and the shipyard and the sailing sail training. Really neat guy. He had a great quote. I've often compared ocean racing with being a prisoner of war, an environment with which, unfortunately, I've had some experience. Hard conditions, cramped quarters, bad food, really bad on boats stocked by midshipmen, and diverse personalities. Instead of the guards beating you, Mother Nature takes over. You can't get out, so you make the best of it. It's a character builder. And then finally, just to show that there's some real fun out there, this is at on Carina, we just passed by the Lizard, the peninsula near the western end of the English Channel, on the end of a transatlantic race. We're 48 feet and weigh 36,000 pounds. Comanche, 100 feet, weighs only a little more than us, with Kenny Reed skippering. We had a bet who would get there first. And we just finished, and here comes Comanche up from behind us. We got there first, but watch them go by us.
Jesus Christ. Scared the shit out of us.
One thing I forgot to mention is we started 7 days out of them. We had a bet on that. So it's a lot of fun out there. It's worth it. And all the horror stories might sound like they're unnecessary, but they teach lessons. And the coolest lesson is that if you're prepared and you've prepared your team and go out with the right attitude, you're going to do just fine. You're going to have a great time.